So this is something that I really look forward to, and it's probably been, 4 years ago that Phil Moses had an idea that we would start to have something called CADRE Talks, which would be a sort of a mild variant on the notion of TED Talks, and that the invitation would be to think about people who we felt were particularly noteworthy, who we had found influential, sort of local hometown heroes, but hometown heroes who definitely belonged, and as it turns out, have demonstrated that they belong on the national level. And this year, it was my particular delight. I got to pick 4 people who, in my estimation, are really the top of the top, and who have each in their own way personally had an important influence on me. And then Diana mentioned that she had been totally rocked by our speaker, Kendra Hughes. So we have a quintet of, I think, amazing people. Our first speaker today is Martin Rafferty. Martin is the Executive Director of Youth ERA, or Youth Era? ERA or Era? Youth Era, and I apologize. I've known Martin forever with Youth Move Oregon. They've just now become recently Youth Era, and Martin experienced homelessness throughout his childhood and into his teen years. Before being adopted, he describes having been personally saved by a youth empowerment program. By the age of 17, he was hired as the assistant director of that program. Now Martin is running a national youth empowerment program, Youth Era, based on using advanced youth engagement tactics to reach system-weary youth and youth who are in crisis. I've enjoyed working with Martin in a variety of contexts, most recently youth homelessness, and been repeatedly struck by the power of his message and the fluidity with which he moves between digital and analog worlds. I consider Martin a real, I want you to hear this the right way, a real partner in crime. He speaks the truth, and I always learn from him. Martin Rafferty.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Marshall is a hometown hero, and he's been a good friend of my family, a good friend of me. So grateful to be here. Going to be looking at keeping on track time-wise. And for folks who are looking to get some practical tools, we are going to have links at the end, and you can find a lot of those kinds of tools after the presentation is over. So let's do a little bit of interaction. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself an educator? Okay. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself a parent, family member, or caregiver? And a provider, decision maker, or admin in this field? An advocate. We all wear a lot of similar hats. My story, Marshall talked a little bit about my story. I want to share briefly that my mental health came from trauma. I was a victim, my family was a victim of domestic violence. So we moved, the count goes up and down sometimes, but something like 13 different schools by the time I graduated high school. And sometimes we would leave in the middle of the school day. That was the preferred time that my biological mom chose to run. So even after I was adopted finally here in Eugene, I was always waiting in class for the principal, the vice principal, to come in and take me out, because it was time to leave home and go to a new place, a place where you don't know anybody, a place where nothing makes sense. So that was my expectation, and because of that, I was a horrible high school student. I was adopted by someone very much like you, and it wasn't a legal adoption. She kind of kidnapped me, right? I was considered a runaway. I had been homeless and on the streets before, But when Madge took me in, she took me in secret, and I had to live from 16 to the age of 18 with that as a secret from everyone but a principal who knew everything and risked his career to sign off on the papers to let me go to school. So I just want to illustrate for those few moments that the bureaucracies and the rule breaking that had to happen for me to be here is a big part of why I started Youth Move. Youth Move Oregon, Star Wars, it's timely, thank you, I have a thumbs up. Youth Move Oregon is a program that, and I love that Alicia Hayes is here, because Alicia Hayes is one of the first people that I worked with. And I accepted a job at Looking Glass where I was co-located with the county. And the only reason I accepted the job, because I was given the idea about this budget, and I thought, these bureaucrats don't know what they're doing with this. If I had these resources, what could we do? And so I didn't know the great partnerships those were going to be. Back then, I saw all bureaucrats as the enemy, and then I started to understand partnering with systems. But my story also has to do with my family. And so there's an important question that we had to answer before we started Youth Move Oregon, before we started the work that we do with Youth Move Oregon. And that question is, should having a disability define you? Any answers? No? You hear the phrase singing to the choir. The choir, though, they see that as practice. It's important for us to completely stay with our values, why we're doing what we're doing, and where we came from to move ahead. This is my niece. I'm going to show you a little video with her. And this is her practicing for state championships. She was born without her arm, without her hand and forearm. She does have the use of fingers. She won the state championship in her age division, right? Yeah. It took her bow instructor 25 minutes to watch a YouTube video and make a few adjustments. We would later, when it was time to go to the state championships, make something more impressive. But by watching YouTube, we were able to help change this bow and get it working for her. So those are the reasons that I'm here. It's the trauma in my background. It's me becoming a youth who, for months, I was not identified as systems. I was homeless without any services. This is before I was adopted. And I understood from that background that there's a population that you guys might have heard of, that Marshall talked about, system-weary youth. System-weary youth. These are the youth that maybe their parents have a problem trusting the government. Maybe they're underdocumented. Maybe they're paranoid because they had a bad run-in with a cop. Whatever reason, there's a huge population in Oregon. And in 2005, a study was done by then AMH, now Oregon Health Authority, showing that at ages 25, 26, 27, 28, we were seeing a lot of deaths. We were seeing a lot of long-term medical needs for this young population. And so the question is could we do something to try and stop those long-term costs before we hit that mark? And so we decided that we were going to create a model that could uniquely pick out those system-weary youth. Get them excited where they were. Not about the system, not about the work that we wanted to do, but about what would be exciting for them. That video is very confusing to a lot of the professionals we work with. Was anyone a little confused in watching that? A little bit? All right, well, we make videos for young people, and we also make videos for adults. That's an example of a video we made for young people. And what that room is a $68,000 production with a lot of donors behind a vision that if we could create spectacle, a unique spectacle, that we could lure in young people who may be system weary and help them to get connected with systems. This is the tool in which we do that. This is free at our website, and it's very important. We never look at advertising, brochure, design, graphic artists. We never look at that as advertising. In 2017, if you don't have access to social media content creation, and you're trying to serve a younger population, you're defunct. And so there is this archaic notion that is at the very top here in Oregon, and frankly across the country I've seen it, where when I was invited to the Behavioral Health Collaborative, which was a very small group of people that got to go to that, I was the lowest paid person in the room, right? I was like the token advocate guy that was there. They were thinking about how can we create more access points into the system. So they're like, let's get innovative. Let's really think about, well, what if the mailman was trained? What if the mailman was trained to spy a young person having a panic attack? And that could be an entry into the system. What about a trash man? What if a trash man could be that person? Nowhere on that list of 46, 47 was any mention of social media, any mentioning of any kind of electronic digital outreach at all. Not one. And the goal was to be innovative. And my good friend Bob Lieberman, who runs a program I think that's nationally known called Kairos Northwest. He just retired. He doesn't like the word retired too, so I don't know what to say. He did really great, and he's on to a new position. He said that the field hates technology because the first interaction they had with it made their lives more complicated, made their work more scary, and made it more difficult. And so I understand that practically. But that's why we're working. We just got back from Tennessee. Tia and Jamie here. We're training folks in Tennessee. I was in Cincinnati. The suicide rates in Cincinnati and in Ohio, it's now the top way that adolescents die is to suicide. So there is a urgent need for our fields to start having this conversation and gently move into the social media world. HIPAA compliant, all of those things, we have to figure it out and start having that conversation. But the social media side, this social engagement compass that we made, our youth engagement compass that we made, really focuses on reaching the social circle of the youth that we're working with. So if I want you to come to my drop-in center, you're a 14-year-old young person who uses mental health services, I need to be able to give you this YouTube video that you guys just watched. So when you get back to show your friends what you just did, they're not going to stigmatize you. They're not going to look at where you just were as some kind of negative. So this tool is very useful in thinking about when you're doing design and outreach, how you're going to work with gatekeepers, with family members, and with social circles of youth. We have a problem in Oregon, and there have been a few other states where we've seen where young people are going into their IEP meetings, or they're not going into their IEP meetings. They're not being invited. It doesn't make sense. The setup doesn't make sense. Folks don't know what to do with them while they're there. And so in Oregon, we have young adult peer supports that we send in with them. But we have this problem where sometimes we would send this team, the young person, that advocate, into a hospital maybe, where there's no cell access, there's no internet. And so we had to find a solution for that. So this free app allows two devices to communicate HIPAA compliant with Bluetooth, in between Bluetooth. So you don't have to have any kind of access to a third-party server. Just one quick tool about if a young person sitting in an IEP meeting doesn't understand what's going on, maybe doesn't feel confident to talk about it, they can be actively communicating with their advocate, and it's a fail-safe kind of tool. Lastly, this picture, I know it's a little hard to see in the middle, is our response to the Reynolds School shooting. We brought peer support specialists to help with a very specific problem that Reynolds had. The problem that Reynolds had was that it was 3 or 4 days before the end of the school year when the shooting happened, and so they never got to bring the students back before the summer break. And so the fear was all of these students were going out, and they were going to be, what we know about trauma, they're going to be demonizing this place that they need to come back to, that they need to feel comfortable here. And who knows what access to services that they have. Robocalls weren't working, letters out weren't working, a free mental health clinic wasn't working. So we called our friends at Google. We actually have friends at Google somehow. we do. Don't we, Marshall?
Oh, you kidding?
Thanks. I'm a Google fanboy nerd, so I'm amazed that we have friends at Google. They sent us 300 Google Cardboard units. Back then, if I said virtual reality, you would have squinted your eyes at me. Now you kind of know what virtual reality is. You've heard about it. PlayStation has its own virtual reality. But back then, no one had any idea about what it was. So we sent out a flyer to these young people saying, come experience the top gaming virtual reality technology. And 220 students came to that event. But I said earlier, right, that robocalling and sending out letters weren't working. And so in this picture on the far right, there's another very practical app that we use called Whisper. Whisper, if you go and download it right now, you'll be horrified because it's a lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers posting inappropriate pictures, talking about drug use. It's not a fun place for a youth professional to be. But something else that you find a lot of is young people saying, I just took 15 Tylenol. How long do I have to wait to take more so I can die? You know, so we've had to start monitoring a network that, have any of you heard of Whisper before? So maybe 10% of you have. So we've started to look at this software that most of the population doesn't know about because the next generation of youth, that's where they are. Because Pepsi and Nike, they can't advertise on Whisper, right? Whisper is geographically locked. So we sent 15 of our staff members into the Reynolds community, and had them post invitations to this fun virtual reality event through that app. And that's where a majority of our youth who came to that event found out about it. They shared it with friends, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm desperately out of time. The website's down there. You can find my email there. Happy to talk after. I really want to encourage everyone today to go back and start having this conversation about technology. And I also, and this isn't just something I'm saying because I'm up here, I want to say thank you. Because if the organization that I started, if Youth Move Oregon or ERA, if we've saved one youth from committing suicide, if we helped one youth, get the help they needed after a school shooting, it's because people like you were there for me. And I can't go back and find whoever you were for me, right? I can't go back and find those people. So I hope if you only hear one thing from me today, is that you'll never see your impact, but it's there and it's real. So thank you.